Hello and welcome to day 2 of the speech and debate tournament here at Kiev International School. The feeling's great. We just interviewed some of the participants in some of the schools, and well, there's some different feelings in the atmosphere about yesterday's games, although everyone said that they loved their hosts. Isn't that right, Dima?
That's absolutely correct, and teams are already setting up for the quarterfinals of the debates. Uh, it's about to take place in a couple of minutes. Yeah, I was interviewing people, and everyone is saying that they could have done better, but they almost all of them are satisfied with the results they've got.
Right, so first round supposed to start just at 8:30 is round 3B debate quarterfinals, and these are the teams that passed all 3 rounds yesterday and will be proceeding. So the preliminary rounds, they have one type of setup where the what are they called? Constructive speeches are 6 minutes each, and then there are 2-minute cross examinations for each team. But then today, all of the debates will be set up a bit differently, so they'll take a bit longer. It's 8-minute constructive speeches, and then there are 2 rounds of cross examinations. And so here we'll get a look at the first debate between Kiev and Sofia, and just to let you know that it will be, the same topic as yesterday, but Kiev for affirmative and Sofia for negative. So let's go to that room.
Guys, before we start, can we just remind you about the sequence of all speeches and cross-examination? We've been asked to do this. Okay, so we would first affirmative constructive, and then second negative cross-examines, first negative constructive, and then first affirmative examines. Second affirmative constructive, first negative cross-examines, second negative constructive, and second affirmative cross-examines. Yes, yes, of course, fine.
So only for the semifinals,
And finals is 8 minutes.
oh, there's a time, sorry.
Okay, so an update that the teams just did a coin toss to determine which one will be arguing for affirmative and negative. As in the past rounds, both of them have done an equal amount of affirmatives and negatives debates between the 3 rounds. So from now on, that's how they will be determined in the quarter, semi, and finals by a coin toss. They are preparing, and the debate will begin shortly between Kiev International School and Sofia.
I know, but it's because yeah, we swapped because we had yeah, we were originally placed in rooms that we were so desperate and backwards. Right? Yeah. Well, no. I didn't switch. It was room 23 and 24 that switched. This room, I was fine. But and Helsinki's room, yeah. Yeah, we'll start. We are where we're here. Yeah. Right. Okay.
As soon as you start speaking, I will start.
I'm I7 from Kiev International School, representing the affirmative in speech and debate. Madam Chairperson, honorable judges, worthy opponents, ladies and gentlemen, the resolution before us today is that let it be resolved that scarce world resources should be controlled by an international organization. We, the affirmative, define the first term, resources, as natural resources, for example, material sources of wealth, such as fresh water, natural gas, or mineral deposits of which occur in a natural state. Our second term, scarce, as properties with which have a rarity, are uncommon, or that not everyone who needs it can receive it. Our third term, controlled, we define as held and equitably distributed, in this case being the scarce resources. We, the affirmative, have 6 needs for change, the first of which being that not everyone in the world is able to receive the resources that they need to live relatively comfortably, or at least to survive. Regard the fact that 783 million people around the world do not have access to clean water to drink. Not only is it a crucial issue plaguing the lives of millions of individuals, it is a violation, according to the UDHR, that beings should be denied the resources with which to live adequately. By increasing efforts in sensible water distribution, the issue of fresh water scarcity could very easily be solved. The Worldwide Fund for Nature calculated that by 2050, humankind will need 100% more of the world's total biocapacity. And having only one planet, its capacity to support an entire world of diversity is extremely limited. Our reason number 2 is that corrupt governments have, and do, in the past and present, exploit the resources of their countries and limit the amount of goods able to reach their citizens. It is a necessity to prevent corrupt governments and limit the amount of, it is a necessity to prevent corrupt governments from limiting these resources and this type of exploitation. For too long have the resources of countries been unable to be used by their citizens. If a country depends on exploitation of its natural resources, it has not only caused security problems within itself, but long-term unstable reliance. Depletion of resources generates serious implications on a country's long-term economic and social development. Natural resources are perceived by the governments as an easier or convenient way to receive monetary gains. This only promotes a political approach separated from the interests of the public or based upon competition for control of resources. When countries begin to exploit their resources, there's a temptation of corrupt government officials to adopt political or legal measures appropriate to only themselves and for their own benefit. This behavior results in not only political instability, lack of proper management in developing the country in a sustainable way, but allows for negative consequences on the economy of the nation. There have been a few countries developing from their abundance of resources, such as Brazil, Argentina, Ghana, or India, but others have been severely devastated by a lack thereof. For example, Myanmar, Burkina Faso, or Burundi. Therefore, if one could unite a majority of these countries, there would be a beneficial success to the majority of nations. Our third reason is that an international body to spread resources could aid other countries during national disasters, during these momentary lapses when resources are limited due to disaster. For example, September 2017, Puerto Rico had a horrifying hurricane in which many died due to inaccess to fresh water. Just think that if there had been an international body to aid in resources, there would have been a depletion in the amount of lives lost. January 2010, Haiti experienced a massive earthquake that devastated the country. The humanitarian effort of a few other nations in helping Haiti during their time of crisis was simply not enough, and even after 7 years of the incident, there are still 2.5 million people in need. However, recently in the past 2 years, due to an outcry from the international community, the aid received in the island has begun to focus further on long-term economic development by giving resources that were destroyed by the earthquake and have, in the past 2 years, been able to replenish faster than the 5 years prior. Our fourth reason is that establishing an international organization to prevent conflict will be beneficial because prime reasons for upcoming wars and conflicts will be have been the exploitation of scarce world resources. Of course, one cannot foresee the future. However, there have been many past situations as well as current examples. Take Iraq, for example, What was the reason the war erupted? Natural resources. You could even look closer to us here in Ukraine, such as what was the initial cause of the conflict than more than a decade ago? Russia's gas line through the country. These two will be further elaborated by my partner. And why was the UN constructed in the first place? Because most countries are willing to unite to prevent such a multitude of global conflicts. Creating an organization would lead to a cooperation between nations in order to solve economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian international problems whilst maintaining international peace and security. Concluding with our reason number 4 is that the creation of a global body representative will lead to the spread of resources and the suffering of humans under which have endured a lack of resources due to their governments, corrupt governments. The incompetence of global aid or general poverty. Imagine if there were an international body to regulate the resources, to provide further resources to countries in need, and picture how well countries after disaster could prosper, far quicker, or the innocent people of the country in deep poverty could succeed. Our plan about this idea is to create a body representative which a majority of nations are a part of. The creation of this organization will in turn address common issues that a majority of nations have and need cooperative support in. These include the degradation of the environment, the government's exploitation, the necessity of resources, and the lasting effects of natural disasters. The positive consequence of the solution is that there will be an equitable distribution, thus resulting in potential growth of economy, distinct decrease in government exploitation, and the aid in the conservation of the environment. In conclusion, we, the affirmative, have shown the clear needs for change regarding the creation of international organization due to the following reasons. The governments have in the past and present exploited their resources and limited them from reaching their citizens. Natural disasters during the momentary lapses when countries are physically and economically weak. There would be beneficial success to the nations participating because it would provide resources to countries that are limited thus. A workable solution we have presented allows for the creation of an international body and would in the end provide for a better world and the reduction of those in necessity. We hope that we have convinced you that you must support the resolution, this debate, and vote for the affirmative. I know I stand for cross-examination. No, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you for your speech, first, affirmative. We just have a few questions for you. First of all, how will distributing more water around the world solve the problem of resource scarcity?
It would solve the problem of water scarcity that are in multiple nations.
But our question is, how will distributing more water solve scarcity?
This is a hypothetical question because we cannot foresee the future of what's going to happen after you create this.
Okay, thank you. Could you name a few countries that exploit resources, as you mentioned in your speech?
Yes, the Democratic Republic of Congo has corruption.
Okay. Do you believe that corruption or bureaucracy exists on an international organization?
No.
No, okay, thank you. Could you clarify on how your case today solves the problem of resource scarcity? Because you mentioned water, giving more water actually solves this. Could you clarify a little bit?
It solves the problem of resource scarcity because the resources of many other countries would be used to distribute to other countries that have...
Thank you. Are you suggesting that international organizations should regulate resources?
Yes.
How will you ensure that larger nations will cooperate with your international organization?
We cannot foresee the future. Again, this is hypothetical.
Okay.
Some good questions from the Sophia team, and a very good set of definitions and constructive speech from Kiev International School first affirmative speaker, and now it will be the first negative speaker from Sophia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the respected audience, honorable judges, fellow debaters. My name is Atanas Kondakov and I'm representing the Anglo-American School of Sofia as the first negative speaker in today's debate on the notion scarce world resources should be controlled by an international organization. As my partner and I will be defending the opposing side, we strongly believe that no, world resource scarcity should not be in the control of an international organization. Before starting to build our case, however, I would like to clarify some of the definitions of key terms in the notion. Although we do mostly agree with what the affirmative side presented as their definitions, we would like to add on to them for the sake of having a broader scope. The Merriam-Webster derived definition of scarce world resources that we plan on referring to today is non-renewable or not sufficiently renewable natural resources, such as coal, oil, gas, and fresh water, which are deficient in quantity compared to the demand. Another essential term in the notion is control, which dictionary definition is to have power over and or to have influence.
Elizabeth, the cluster one.
In our case, world resource scarcity. Lastly, we would like to define the term international organization as a single governing body composed of organizations or institutions or representatives of numerous member states. Today, our side supports and will defend the idea that establishing a new institution or handing over the power of resource control to an existing international organization in order to solve the problem of resource scarcity is most definitely not required and absolutely redundant. Instead, we should acknowledge alternative measures and focus on developing such technologies rather than bringing our attention to an international institution which will ultimately fail to properly address the global issue of resource scarcity. The first argument to why an international organization should not be in control of scarce world resources is the idealism behind the construction of such an organization. Before I delve into details, however, I would like to define the terms idealism and pragmatism, which we believe are essential to this debate. Oxford Dictionary defines idealism as the unrealistic belief in or pursuit of perfection, whereas pragmatism is an attitude or policy which is dealing with issues sensibly and realistically in a way that is based on practical rather than theoretical and hypothetical considerations. We would like to also clarify that there is a vast difference between being idealistic and being too idealistic. An international organization dedicated to resource scarcity issues, while including a significant amount of nations around the world, is simply too idealistic and can be extremely difficult to approach. We ask this question: why has a large-scale international institution in regards to resource scarcity not been established before? It is because it is too idealistic. It's too difficult to get major nations to provide, even give up their resources to such a governing body. When our side thinks of a global-scale organization filled to the brim of nations of unequal economic and geographical power having to give up their resources, we say it's too idealistic. International organizations are designed at the core with an external structure that serves as a power grab for large nations around the world. In terms of idealism, our side concedes that idealism has powered humanity into a position of blissed times. However, idealism stands on a fulcrum that needs to be balanced with pragmatism. People like Martin Luther King, like Gandhi, had idealistic visions but provided pragmatic solutions to their issues. As humanity, we cannot only look towards idealistic situations. We have to realize idealism is the vision and not the process that makes the vision work. In this case, we may all hope that an international organization will save us from the problem of resource scarcity, but in reality, this process is more difficult than it may seem. Under the control of an international organization is idealistic and provides no realistic approach on how the resources will be managed, how control will be given, and ultimately how it will help our future. Our second argument to why an international organization should not be in control of scarce wood resources is the breaching of different forms of sovereignty by an international organization. Our side believes that the solving of the problem of resource scarcity does not have to involve an international organization taking away the scarce natural resource that a nation owns. According to the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the General Assembly Resolution 1803 declares that, I quote, "The right of peoples and nations to permanent sovereignty over their natural wealth and resource must be exercised in the interest of their national development and of the well-being of the people of the state concerned." In addition, the resolution also states that the violation of the rights of peoples and nations to sovereignty over their natural wealth and resources is contrary to the spirit and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and hinders the development of international cooperation and the maintenance of peace. There are many different things that we can understand from these two clauses from the resolution. Firstly, even an international organization says that resources should be managed on a national level and not on an international level, as this is a clear violation of sovereignty. This clearly tells us that, and we will answer the prompt, international organizations should rightfully not even control scarce wood resources. Furthermore, one of the clauses do state that the violation of the sovereignty of resources can hinder the maintenance of peace. Conflict may erupt, as you said, because of resources. Instead of international organization, nations should have to start looking at alternatives that include sustainable technologies and methods. An international organization does not necessarily guarantee success, but human ingenuity will always prevail. As we advance through time, humanity will invent new and better sustainable technologies that will assist us through this harsh time of resource scarcity. My partner today, Brandon Lim, will explain more on the different alternatives that nations can and should undertake in this fight to solve resource scarcity. And further elaborate more on why the controlling of scarce wood resources by an international organization is not appropriate, is not required at all. Because we need to act now with whatever we have at our disposal today. Some action is needed. Now, right now. Thank you.
I have a question. Am I crossing
First affirmative is Grossman.
You describe alternative measures. Could you please describe some of these?
Well, as I said, my partner will give more details, but I can give you some examples of alternative measures, alternative technologies. For example,
How do you mean when you
okay.
said natural resources should be controlled on an international national level?
may you rephrase your question, please?
How do you mean when you said natural resources should be controlled on a national level?
We mean that having an international organization control the resources is a direct breach of sovereignty.
Thank you. You stated sustainable technologies. Could you please provide some examples?
Yes, as I was trying to earlier. For example, solar panels or wind turbines. We might be talking about electric cars, I believe, as well. There's so many things.
Are you aware that the UN already has these idealistic goals and projects?
Yes, and they've been having them since 2000 and something, like 2005 or so.
Do you have any examples for this idealism and impossible vision?
Yes. Being too idealistic means that you cannot achieve it. For example, it might be a bit of a risky example, but let's look at the Arab Spring. Because
Thank you. Do you agree that no country has all resources in the world?
may you repeat your question, please?
Do you agree that no country has all resources in the world?
Well, no country has all the resources.
Does this not imply that the countries would be aiding one another and giving resources that the other countries have less of?
This can be achieved with less than an international organization.
Thank you.
Wow, a packed, strong, first constructive of the negative team, and they had the argument of a non-idealistic international organization, though we saw Helsinki counter-argue this yesterday in round 3. So let's see if the second affirmative speaker will address this in her rebuttals.
I'm I2, representing Kiev International School. Thank you for the engaging debate we've had so far with the negative. As the second speaker of the affirmative, I will address the practicality of our plan, proving our proposal is both practical and beneficial. As we already have established its significance, the affirmative believes that there's a need for change in the ineffective distribution of scarce world resources, of which often has been due to governmental exploitation, leading to decreased chances for survival of people and the degradation of the environment. Unlike the other team, we have a clear plan for the resolution and offer a workable solution, being which to create an organization that a majority of willing nations are part of which address common issues and the necessity for cooperative support. This would result in positive consequences with sensible distribution, thus leading to potential growth of economies, distinct decrease of government exploitation, and aid in conservation of the environment. When human demand of such universal capacity exceeds availability, when we surpass our ecological limits, we erode the health of Earth. Ultimately, this loss threatens the well-being in humanity. With an international organization, scarce resources could be used efficiently, practically, and sustainably for future generations, eventually improving the Global Human Development Index. Secondly, by preventing corrupt governments of limiting resources to their citizens, sensible distribution will be furthered and sustainable development will have extreme potential. The more the state revenues derived from the exploitation of natural resources, the larger the temptation of corrupt governments to government officials to adopt political and legal measures to exploit them for their own benefit. Such behavior may result in political instability, lack of proper management in developing the country in a sustainable way, and short-term profit-oriented strategies with negative implications on budgetary revenues. The results are reduced in efforts to invest in areas such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, development, support in other economic areas, and industries which do not rely initially on the exploitation of natural resources and other measures to promote long-term sustainable growth. There are endless examples of corrupt governments, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to a report, corruption is so deeply rooted in the Democratic Republic of Congo that there's little motivation to try to unearth it at this point. The president has declared on numerous occasions his commitment to fighting corruption, but there is neither indication of any sort nor evidence of progress beyond the establishment of a strong possessive voice. There's also Libya. According to an April report by the Financial Times, administrators who are overseeing Libya's vast oil wealth, which accounts to 90% of Libya's revenues, have been accused of gross domestic economic mismanagement. Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, elected in 1998, has caused a number of issues, and the nationalization of the country's rich oil reserves has created only more. Money that was supposed to go to the people was instead being funneled to high-ranking government officials in favor of exploiting fossil fuels. Our second reason is, despite the failings of many international organizations, the UN, for example, has managed to mediate conflict between the countries such as Sierra Leone, Liberia, Burundi, Sudan, and Nepal. The UN Environment Programme suggests that in the last 60 years, at least 40% of all interstate conflicts have a link to natural resources. Since 1990, at least 18 violent conflicts have been fueled by the exploitation of natural resources, such as diamonds, gold, minerals and oil, fertile land and water. Due to the fact that most international conflicts resulted due to resource issues, imagine if there were an international organization specifically to regulate resources which would contribute in preventing a multitude of international disagreements. The UN is already working on such resolution with a majority of countries in agreement. Also, the UN has a total of 70 official resolutions, 19 of which address the exact issue of scarce resources. Thirdly, if countries can provide resources for one another during natural disasters, the suffering regions will be able to recover faster. Burkina Faso, for example, has been plagued by frequent droughts, and although its main export is cotton, it has been unable to be a reliable cash crop due to heavy fluctuation in the industry. Another example would be the Democratic Republic of Congo. Although rich in economic resources, it has suffered from war and corruption since its independence in 1960. Once the second most industrialized country in Africa, it has now the lowest GDP per capita in the world. Burundi is landlocked, lacks natural resources, and although recent political stability has proven beneficial, poverty remains extremely prominent. This leads to our fourth point, to the beneficial aspect of our plan. A focal reason for potential upcoming wars and conflicts is the exploitation of these said resources. We have recent examples to prove the likelihood of such conflicts and wars. There's Ukraine. It's Russia's gateway into European gas markets, and although Moscow wants to stop with the transaction, Kiev wishes to maintain the current arrangement as transit revenues contribute annually to the Ukrainian economy, and they act as a buffer against further Russian aggression. Russia provides 1/4 of all natural gas consumed in the EU, 80% of which travel through pipelines across Ukrainian soil prior to arriving to the EU. If Nord Stream 2 is completed, it will come as a severe blow to transatlantic relations and EU energy security. Therefore, the unjust control of natural gas can cause an escalating conflict among two neighboring countries that most of Europe relies on. And their example would be that of Iraq. Its vast wealth and natural resources have made it a target for all kinds of industry and war profiteers, as we have witnessed over the recent decade. And unsurprisingly, corruption. Iraq has actually seen some economic growth as the country rebuilds itself, but there's also a lot of outside interference from American and European contracting companies hired to rebuild infrastructure and tap into the country's oil reserves. In conclusion, the affirmative has clearly shown that the proposal is practical because preventing corrupt governments from limiting resources to citizens, there will be sensible distribution of resources and sustainable development. If countries can provide resources to one another during natural disasters, the suffering of regions could recover and be fixed faster, and many potential conflicts and wars will be prevented with an international control over scarce resources. This creation of this organization will in turn address common issues that a majority of nations have and need cooperative support in. These include the degradation of the environment, the government's exploitation, and necessity of resources, lasting effects of natural disasters. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. We have a couple of questions for you. First, may you provide an example of an international organization that successfully controls resources?
Yes, there's the UN. As I mentioned, they have the UN Environmental Programme, which has resolution.
Thank you. Do you suggest that we should limit the resources in order to solve resource scarcity?
To an extent, yes.
Thank you. How would you suggest, that developing countries, such as very industrialized countries that are still industrializing, will be developing with limited resources?
Well, other countries will be able to support them.
Thank you. If you mentioned the Congo in your speech, if Congo is so corrupted, how much have they contributed to the problem of resource scarcity?
Well, they could be aided by other countries to solve their issues, and if they recover faster, they will be able to contribute to other countries if they will be in need.
Can you give us some examples of specific conflicts of resource war that you mentioned?
Sure. So, as I've mentioned, there was the Congo from the Congo Wars, and the Democratic Republic of Congo has had conflicts all the time, with President Kaliba declaring numerous occasions of his commitment with fighting corruption. That never happened.
Excuse me, but are those wars or conflicts connected to resources?
Yes, they're corrupt by using their resources without any equal distribution.
But are the wars about corruption or about the resources?
Yes. For example, there's Libya. According to Financial Times, administrators are overseeing Libya's vast oil wealth.
Okay, thank you. How would you suggest that an international organization solves the Russian gas problem?
By that, we'll have a equal distribution and limitation to exploiting an equal amount.
Would you say that if oil, which was one of the resources that you mentioned, was governed by a centralized organization, it would be beneficial?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You don't have any questions.
Wow, an absolutely fantastic second affirmative speech from speaker I2 of Kyiv International School. Very strong, getting lots of points in their contentions, and now it will be the second negative speaker, just preparing, setting up the stool, and he will be on his way to speak shortly.
Okay. Yep. Good afternoon. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brandon Lim, and I am the second negative speaker of today. And our side believes that scarce world resources should absolutely not be controlled by international organizations, and we are here to tell you why. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what my partner asked opposition today in cross-examination. He asked, is the centralization of oil within an international organization beneficial to the oil problem? But we are here to tell you no. Look at OPEC. OPEC is an international organization, or also more commonly known as an international cartel. They own 82.2% of the world's oil, and yet the oil problem is still happening. Tell me, opposition, OPEC is an international organization in control of a scarce resource, and yet the problem is still not changing. OPEC is controlling oil for the purpose of profit, and not for the purpose of the future. OPEC is a group of nations, an international organization comprised of different member states that control oil for the sake of making profit, not for the sake of preserving oil. They limit supply on the market to raise oil prices. They don't limit oil supply on the market to make oil more abundant for the future. Now, we'd like to talk about the point that they said that when I asked opposition today in cross-examination whether there's corruption or bureaucracy in an international organization, they said no. However, our side absolutely disagrees. Let's look at the United Nations. They have a Big Five system. If that isn't bureaucracy, I don't know what is. They have a Big Five. They can veto any resolution whenever they want to, and it is extremely detrimental to equality. And this is why we shouldn't have an international organization, because there's always going to be a power imbalance. Let's look at the Iraq War. Opposition today has mentioned Iraq is a nation that has been exploited in terms of its resources, but they mentioned that the US and British companies are exploiting them. But how has that happened? Iraq War. Who remembers when in the UN, the UK and the US used their power to veto a peace resolution in terms of Iraq? The US and the UK used their powers within an international organization to cause a resource war. We absolutely disagree with the notion that resource wars are caused by non-international organizations, because we take a look at the Iraq War as a major example. Now, they also gave an example of Haiti not being helped, but why hasn't the UN helped Haiti, opposition? We ask you this. Why do we need a new international organization to help Haiti? Why hasn't Haiti been helped by the United Nations already? We have to realize there are already so many international organizations out there. We don't need them to control resources. When Haiti suffers a problem, we expected the UN to go help them, but the UN didn't. What now? Do we need a new international organization that says, I'm going to help Haiti, but they really don't? Our side absolutely disagrees. Now, let's talk about distribution. Opposition said that distribution is the way to solve this resource problem. However, if you have 50 gallons of oil that are belonging to the US and you distribute them to smaller countries, 50 gallons of oil are still going out there. It doesn't solve the problem of resource scarcity. You're still distributing the same amount of oil. There is nothing solved. You're merely distributing them to smaller, less developed nations. You're not actually solving the problem at the core, which is resource scarcity, which is the prompt today. Now, our side today would like to begin with the third argument of the negative side today, which is the adoption of sustainable technology or methods to address the issue of resource scarcity. Now, in regards to this idea, our side believes that an international organization is absolutely not required for humanity to find alternatives, for human ingenuity to prevail, for humans to use their smartness and creativity to invent new technologies and adopt existing technologies to help the better good. We have to realize there's so many different technologies like electric cars, wind turbines, solar panels, water purification systems. We have to realize there's so many different technologies out there that can be adopted. Electric cars take 50% less material to manufacture, and they use rare materials, metals, and other resources to manufacture. If they use 50% less, that is an extremely significant amount. And we have to realize that these electric cars will grow by almost 100 million units in the next 12 years. We have to realize that humanity is taking its time in terms of how we approach this problem. And we have to realize that time is our friend here, because we know that in the next 12 years to 20 years, we can solve this problem with the technologies that we are about to adopt. Let's look at solar panels. The sunlight is a renewable energy source. We will almost never run out of sunlight to power this world. However, we would like to say that if you limit oil, you're not creating more oil. There hasn't been a method to create more oil in existence right now, but human technology is coming extremely close. And we have to realize during that period when we are inventing new technologies, we have to realize that we have to create other technologies to replace these ones. And solar panels are an incredibly useful renewable energy source that humanity can approach to use. Jeffrey Ball, an author whose work focuses on the environment and energy, details the importance of renewable energy for the future, as well as wind turbines, and in general, harnessing the energy of the wind. We have to realize that an international organization isn't needed in terms of creating new technologies. We have to realize that we have so many international organizations right now in existence, but what have they done for the environmental problem? We ask you this: why are we still facing an environmental problem if the UN has more than 60 treaties out there outlining what we have to do for the future? Because we have to realize that an international organization is not the way to approach this. Because we have to realize that larger nations can never work with smaller nations on something so global. We have to realize there's always a power imbalance when it comes to an international organization on such a global scale. The idea of creating new technologies does not have to coincide with the idea of an international organization, and it instead comes hand to hand with the idea of human ingenuity. In terms of solving the freshwater problem, we have better filtration system technologies, seawater desalination, and so many other technologies are starting to provide developed and especially poorer nations with the technology it needs to provide water to its people. But tell me, opposition today, is distribution to smaller countries really enough to solve the problem of resource scarcity? Sure, you might be solving the problem of resource scarcity in terms of equality, and apparently now you're giving smaller nations resources, but it still doesn't solve the problem at hand, is that there are still resources in circulation, and the problem of resource scarcity will never change. And this is why I believe that our side today does not want a scarce international organization controlling our scarce world resources. Thank you.
You provided OPEC as the only example for an organization. Do you have any others?
No, there are no international organizations that currently control resources.
Thank you. You mentioned resource wars. Can you give me any examples for that?
I did not mention resource wars. In fact, I was rebutting your point about Iraq being a nation that was exploited, and we need an international organization to solve that. So I said that actually...
You mentioned power imbalance. Could you elaborate on that?
Look at the UN. The UN has a power imbalance. There are big five that have the veto power to veto anything they want, and smaller nations just have to sit there and expect...
You mentioned solar panels. How will that stop countries from exploiting resources?
Because solar panels are renewable energy sources. We realize that we as humanity have to move towards renewable energy sources. It's not about...
You mentioned how these issues shouldn't be resolved by an international organization. How would your side propose to resolve these issues?
No, our side did not say Haiti's issues should not be resolved by an international organization. We said that Haiti's issues has not been resolved by current international organizations. Why hasn't the UN helped Haiti more?
Thank you. You also mentioned, could you please provide us with examples of scarce world resources?
Oil, water, perhaps rare earth minerals.
Thank you. Okay, you stated that organizations do have resource spreading. Provide us with examples.
I'm sorry, can you clarify your question?
Okay, I'll just... you also mentioned how cars are part of this scarce resource and how that should be also fixed. How is that a...
Because we realize that cars are one of the major causes of climate change and resource scarcity because they use so much petrol and fuel. If we use electric cars, they take 50%.
Thank you. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, that was Sophia's second speaker, the second negative speaker. So Sophia's D4 individual used up nearly all the time, filled it with lots of contentions, and used lots of expression to as a persuasive technique, I guess. That was a very strong speech. Kind of got Kiev's second speaker when she had to cross-examine. That was a tough round, so let's sum up what happened. The first two speakers made their contentions. I think if I had to judge this, I think Kiev's first speaker took that game, but for the second speakers, it may very well be Sophia's speaker, D4, who won that game, because as you know, or I'll remind you that this debate is judged as following. First speakers against first speakers and second speakers against second speakers. So sometimes the teams use this strategy to put their strongest speaker in second place because they're predicting that the opposition will put their strongest speaker in the first position. So just as a way to secure a win. And that may be what Sophia has done here, as we see Sophia's D4, who just used lots of expression. We may have seen him perform in other events, I believe, I remember, in impromptu. As for the individuals on the affirmative side, this is the first time we're seeing Kiev's D2, although she does also participate in duet acting very well, and she seems to be doing fantastically with that. And the first speaker with original oratory, we saw her on the stream, so now it will be the negative rebuttal, and Sophia's second speaker approaching the podium.
Our side today believes that OPEC is a perfect example of why we shouldn't let an international organization run our resources. We have to realize that OPEC is an international organization constructed for the sole purpose of making profit. In fact, we could call it a monopoly of oil countries monopolizing their oil for the better sake of profit and not the future. We have to realize that our oil supplies have been dwindling for the last 40 to 50 years. Why? Because OPEC is in control of 82.2%. OPEC is an international organization, and this is why we shouldn't let international organizations control our resources. First of all, we want to ask opposition, how will your international organization look like? What is the power system within your international organization? And how will redistribution work? Because we are sure that redistribution does not solve the problem at hand. Resource scarcity. Redistribution is just simply distributing the resources that one nation has to others. The amount that you distribute is still the same. It doesn't solve the idea at hand that our resources are becoming more and more scarce. They never mention any alternatives, but we have. We have to look towards alternatives. We realize that solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, why are they becoming more popular? Why are they becoming more adopted? Because humanity realizes that these technologies are the only way to approach the situation. We can't ever have an idealistic organization that somehow has all the nations in the world putting their resources into one pile and then redistributing it with no guarantee of success. We have to realize that we should look towards alternatives, not always for the worst situation, which is an international organization. We have to realize there are so many international organizations out there, and yet they still do nothing for our environmental problems. They give an example of Iraq, and we tell you the UN, the UK, and the US use their powers within an international organization, the most powerful, the most large organization in the world, the UN, to exploit oil within Iraq. After the Iraq war was finished, US and UK companies immediately went in for their oil fields. Why has this happened? Why didn't the UN stop it? Is it because there's a power imbalance within international organizations that always exist? This is why our side believes that scarce world resources should never, ever be controlled by an international organization, and why our side has won this debate today. Thank you.
As soon as Max wraps.
Questions?
First of all, we'd like to thank the negative for their engaging argument, but we want to state some flaws in their argument as well. They do not describe how natural resources should be controlled by a national level and do not describe the sustainable technologies nor alternative measures stated prior. This idealism, they state, is an unrealistic belief, as they state, but they yet do not go on to explain how these unrealistic ideals could ever be sustainably or fairly distributing resources, and that is also idealistic. The sovereignty they fought for would not be altered as an organization and would not alter the right of governments to self-govern themselves, and the countries would benefit because countries would be receiving resources that they do not have a large quantity of. We are here to describe not how an organization should be constructed, but should an international organization be constructed, as the prompt of this very debate states. We are solving the issue of reasonable resource distribution does not take away the sovereignty, and giving water is distributing it fairly to the countries that need water, not giving away water that countries need. They provide only one example of the OPEC, but they often state also personal opinions in their arguments. And Haiti's aid from the UN was obviously not enough, so creating a new organization is very vital. They solely speak of oil as a resource example. And also, how are cars relevant to this debate? Because we're speaking of natural resources. They state that no organization controls resources, but how do you explain the UN? We said that all countries we stated not all countries, but a majority of countries. So we, the affirmative, have shown our clear needs for change regarding the creation of an international organization for the following reasons: that the governments have, in the past and present, exploited the resources and limited from reaching their citizens. These natural disasters and momentary lapses when countries are weak is also vitally important. The workable solution we have provided presents us for the creation of an international body representative that a majority, not all, nations are a part of. And this will provide, in the end, for the world of a better reduction of those in necessity. Thank you.
Okay, we're back here. We just saw a fantastic debate between Kiev and Sofia, with Kiev on affirmative and Sofia on the negative. I'd like to say I think very well the Kiev first speaker may have taken that one. She did a fantastic first constructive speech and rebuttal. She followed the flow in the rebuttal, which is something that Sofia's D4 and second speaker was lacking, in my opinion, following the flow. That's one of the most important things in the rebuttal. You're just supposed to, look at all the clashes and in that way persuade the judges that it's your team indeed that won. So that was the quarterfinal round of debate. And there were debates in other rooms as well. We just followed it in one of the rooms. And Dima's here to join us. So you didn't watch the debate, but he was getting some footage that we'll be showing later. The next round that will come at 9:30 is duet acting, and we'll be seeing teams from Budapest, Kiev, Sofia, Belgrade, and Baku. So stay tuned for that. That will be on in the next stream. And if you're liking what you're seeing, please leave a nice comment. And just so you know, this is the second and last day of the speech and debate tournament, so we'll be covering the finals. But as for now, we'll be shooting to the video from our school. I hope you enjoy. It is day 2 of the speech and debate tournament. We are here in the Moody booth with
Mateo Balkan.
Okay.
Or known as E1.
E1?
Yes.
From the International School Belgrade.
That's right.
You guys, how do you think you did last yesterday?
Oh, last day it went perfectly, really it did. Since it's my first competition on speech and debate, I'm really happy with the results, with the commentary I received, with the feedback, so I'm really confident about today.
Are there any strategies you think you will improve on today?
In original oratory, you can't really have strategies, but the only thing that you can really do is improve and go back to the comments that you received and make your oratory even better than it was before.
That's absolutely right. Now tell me, does your school have any particular rivals in this competition?
We don't, because we know that we are one quality team and that we will always do our best to make ourselves the winners of this competition.
Okay, are you sure you don't have a rivalry against Sofia?
Of course not. Why would we?
I don't know, I'm just saying they've been doing really well.
No, we actually really love Sofia. We have great friendships with them, so it's really good.
Alright, how have your posts been?
Oh, they've been great. It's one huge thank you to my host family and of course to all the volunteers here at the competition. and they're all doing a great job for letting us in and for the great hospitality that they have here.
That's
All
right.
against it.
Just one last thing, because there are lots of people watching, by the way. Yesterday it got up to like 20 people. Is there anyone you want to say hi to? Want to say hi to anyone?
Yes, of course. I would like to say hi to my school, of course, if they're watching. So, just thanks to all 20 people who have been watching.
You got that? You
Closely.
20 are the best.
That's
The
right.
20 goats of the world. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll see you later. Good luck.
See you later. Thank you.
Okay. I happen to know you mutually. So, we both have a friend. Let's play the guessing game. She is, she's from Austria.
Laura?
Okay, you got it. Laura Geiger. We have this mutual friend, this connection. She's watching the stream probably. Say hi.
Hi, Laura.
Yeah, hi Laura. Okay, Laura's like, we go way back. It's like 15, 16, 17 years, I don't know. Okay, now, let's get to the speech and debate tournament. How have you done yesterday as a team, and you personally?
This is my first tournament, so I don't really have anything to compare it to, but I think my first time I did like pretty okay.
That's the spirit. Okay, are you going to improve today?
I hope so.
That's also the spirit. How are you going to improve? What events are you doing?
I'm doing impromptu and debate.
Okay.
And then I had to improve. I'm probably going to take the comments that I got from the judges. And just improve on them.
It's a good strategy. How have your hosts treated you?
Very well. Our host is really nice.
Very well, very well. No one seems to have a problem with their host. Unexpected. Well, okay. You know, best of luck. I can see you guys are busy here preparing, so yeah. We'll see you. Say hi to Laura. Mister. What's your name?
Emir.
Okay, Amir. Oh, do you also have a brother called Erin?
Yes. Hi, Emir.
Bro, that's so cool. We saw you on the roster and we're like, we totally want to meet those people. How are you guys doing?
We're good, thank you.
I'm very well. And what events are you participating in?
Debate and
And how's that going?
so.
So. Is it your first tournament?
No, second.
Second? Okay. Are you doing better than the first one?
Yeah.
That's what's important. This tournament is just about improving your speaking skills, so you think you're getting a lot out of it?
Yeah, I think I am.
It's the most important thing. Think you'll get into the finals? Impromptu? Okay. Well, we were watching you and your team Istanbul. You were doing pretty well. So congratulations to you guys. And hope you get into the finals. And here's another question. How do you like your hosts?
They're very nice. I had Mr. Basti teaching KS. And they're very
Oh, great. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Gregor. Yeah, he's a good friend. So, well, I'm glad you're being hosted by them. Is there anyone you want to say hi to?
Not me.
Okay, guys. Sorry, no highs. Well, good luck to you in your impromptu and debate. You can prepare. We'll leave you guys.
Good morning, everyone. Here we have two members of Helsinki team. Guys, what are your thoughts on the first day? How do you think your team did?
Philip, go.
Okay, well, I mean, for me personally, it went pretty well. I got some good feedback, and I think I did pretty well in my original stories, my impromptus. How about you?
Well, my debate results are questionable. However, impromptu went better than expected. So yeah, it was a lot of learning.
One thing that I want to say that, in my opinion, Helsinki team is one of the most charismatic in the tournament. Yeah, but we are not here just for compliments, so some mean questions will follow. Who do you think is your main opponent or enemies?
Ourselves.
So you're into fighting with yourself, right?
Okay.
And how did it feel to wake up at 7 o'clock or 7:30 today on Saturday when you normally sleep till 10? Please.
Not too bad, actually.
Not too bad?
It was freezing cold, but for the rest, I mean...
It was terrible.
It was terrible.
Yeah, very glad to hear. Okay, so in what events are you participating?
participating
Yeah. Impromptu.
She does it a lot, and then she takes pictures, and then
So
she has.
I just wanted to remind you that this is our second day of the tournament, and this is the day where the finals will take place. Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, hi guys. Here we have Elizabeth De Coster, one of the members of our KIS community, and this is our guest.
Carla from Belgrade.
I just wanted to ask her that so she could present herself, but anyway. Okay, what do you think about your house? Be more specific, like what?
It's very kind.
Okay. And where do you normally eat? At home or somewhere downtown?
Depends. Yesterday we went for dinner outside, and this night we were inside.
Okay. So, I just want to hear some secret information from you, like no one will know, because no one's watching us. Let's be honest. So, at what time did you arrive home yesterday? Because, like, knowing Lisa, shut up! It wouldn't be 10 o'clock.
We arrived at 9.
You arrived at 9. Okay, so Lisa, probably I don't know you that much. Okay, what are your thoughts on this day?
I'm not down the road, but I'm doing my best and my goal is and so far that's going pretty well.
And what event do you think you're most successful so far?
I think that will be good.
And acting? Okay, so good luck with your acting today. Thank you.
We're here at the Kiev table, I guess. These guys are here bright and early preparing for their rounds today, and we'd like to ask you, how are you doing in impromptu?
I think we're doing pretty well.
Real good,
Yeah. It's really interesting to be able to improvise on the spot and be able to speak your mind about topics that you might not know a lot about and test your limits.
Well, if you like being put on the spot, why don't you share your best joke?
Your face. That's cut. That's rap. That's a rap.
Okay, how about you, Roman? How's debate going?
You don't have to get personal. Okay, come on, what are you doing out here? Didn't go I expected it to go. Could have gone better. Yeah. Unfortunately, the crowd returned. Our team didn't make it to the quarterfinals. For me, the quarterfinals. I still have a prompt to look forward to, so.
Well, you still have next year, so you guys shouldn't be let down too much.
No, I have impromptu this year.
I know. I mean, debate.
Okay.
So, yeah, guys, well, we're obviously rooting for you. We're from your school, so let's go.
Can be your face workout.
So, thanks for watching the video. We hope that you enjoyed it. So, this is the ending of this stream, and the next stream we will start in just a couple of seconds, where we will talk about duet acting. That's upcoming next.